So usually when we talk about success, right, there is this underlying assumption of a straight line, like a pure meritocracy.
Right, the whole put your head down and work hard mentality.
Exactly. You put your head down, you endure the grueling hours, the spreadsheet balances perfectly, the project launches ahead of schedule, and then the universe or your manager points at you and declares, job well done.
And here is your promotion.
Right. Here is your raise, your elevated status. We are just so conditioned from childhood to believe that raw talent and sweat equity are really the only currencies that matter.
Yeah, I mean, it is a profoundly comforting illusion. The idea that effort perfectly correlates with elevation gives us this sense of control over our own destinies.
But then you actually step into a corporate boardroom.
Right.
Or a highly competitive
I
creative
know.
industry, or honestly, even just a complex, cliquey social circle.
Oh, absolutely.
And suddenly that straight line just fractures into a tangled, nonsensical web. You watch the hardest workers, the people literally carrying the weight of the department, get consistently passed over.
Meanwhile, the individuals who seemingly do nothing but, chat in the hallway and seamlessly agree with the boss.
Yeah, the ones who always look impeccably relaxed, they're the ones holding all the actual influence. The whole transactional equation just completely breaks down.
Which breeds a very specific kind of quiet, burning resentment in people. You feel lost because you were playing by a rule book that the people at the top discarded like years ago.
Exactly. And that is why today we are unpacking a text that throws that old rule book straight into the fire. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we are exploring an excerpt detailing Law 24 from the famous 48 Laws of Power, and it's titled, Play the Perfect Courtier.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. Let me tell you, this source material is a brutal, almost Machiavellian, beautifully structured dissection of how power actually operates. I mean, it is a collection of historical anecdotes, philosophical quotes, and strategic rules about how to thrive in an environment where absolutely everything revolves around political dexterity.
Right. And to frame this properly for you, the listener, we really have to strip away the archaic connotations of the word court.
Yeah, because we hear court society and instantly picture like velvet robes and scepters.
Exactly. People bowing in drafty castles. It feels like this quaint historical curiosity. But the fundamental truth embedded in this text is that the laws of court politics are completely, ruthlessly timeless.
Timeless.
The physical throne room might have vanished, sure, but courts and courtiers still very much exist because power still exists. Where power concentrates, a court inevitably forms around it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want you to mentally scan your own workplace right now, or your industry at large. Think of the person at the absolute top of the hierarchy.
The CEO, the director, whoever.
Right. Now look at the people orbiting them. Notice the unwritten rules of, who gets to speak first in a meeting, who controls the flow of information, whose jokes are laughed at the loudest. If you see those dynamics, you are operating in a modern court.
And that realization can be profoundly uncomfortable. Viewing your life and your career through this lens of manipulation and strategic maneuvering, it feels cold.
It feels very cynical.
It does.
Right.
But what this text argues is that understanding these dynamics is not about transforming into some mustache-twirling villain. It is an absolute requisite for survival.
Even if you just want to keep your head down.
Exactly. Even if you choose a completely defensive posture, even if you just want to do your job and go home, you have to understand the physics of the game just to recognize when you are being played.
Defensive courtiership.
I like that.
Like that. But before we get into the tactical playbook of how to survive, I feel like we need to dissect the anatomy of a court itself. Like, historically speaking, why has the space immediately surrounding a leader always been such a lethal environment?
Well, because a court serves a multi-layered function that inherently breeds paranoia. On the surface, sure, a court garners around a ruler, a king, a sultan, a CEO to amuse them.
Right, to entertain the boss.
But structurally, it is a mechanism of control. It solidifies the social hierarchy by keeping the nobility or the upper management physically and psychologically close to the ruler.
Keep your friends close and your potential rivals closer.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The ruler wants their most powerful subordinates right where they can see them, ensuring no one is off in the provinces building a rival army, so to speak. The court serves power by glorifying the leader, creating this microscopic, insulated world where everyone's primary struggle is simply to please the person occupying the center.
And the lengths to which people will go to achieve that pleasure are staggering. I mean, there's this detail in our sources from a 19th century Arab traveler who visited the court of Darfur, in modern-day Sudan.
Oh, this story is wild.
It really is. He reported that the courtiers there were expected to perfectly physically mimic the Sultan at all times.
Literally at all times.
Yeah. Like, if the Sultan was injured, the courtiers had to feign the exact same injury. If the Sultan went out riding and happened to fall off his horse, every single courtier riding alongside him had to immediately throw themselves violently off their own horses into the dirt.
It is the ultimate manifestation of being in sync with leadership, taken to a terrifying, literal extreme.
Throwing yourself in the dirt because the boss slipped.
Right. Your physical reality becomes entirely subordinate to the ruler's physical reality.
It sounds absurd to us now, but let's map that onto modern corporate culture. Think about when a CEO reads a trendy book about stoicism, right?
Or I suddenly become obsessed with a highly specific diet.
Yes. Or they start using some convoluted piece of business jargon. Within 2 weeks, the entire executive team is casually quoting Marcus Aurelius. They're drinking the exact same green smoothie, and they are slipping that buzzword into every single slide deck.
They're throwing themselves off the horse.
Exactly. They're metaphorically throwing themselves into the dirt.
What's fascinating here is that the underlying psychology is identical. You are aligning your frequency with the source of power. But this is where the text highlights the psychological tightrope the courtier constantly walks.
Because it's a trap, right?
It is. You have to please the ruler, yes. But if you please them too much, you cross the line into glaring sycophancy, which just makes you look desperate and untrustworthy.
Nobody likes a brown noser.
Right, so you have to distinguish yourself from the swamp of other ambitious courtiers to get noticed. But, and this is the fatal catch, you can never ever distinguish yourself so much that you make the ruler feel insecure about their own brilliance.
And historically, slipping off that tightrope didn't just mean a bad performance review.
No, it meant exile. It meant losing your head.
Which totally reframes how we should view these historical courtiers. I think we tend to think of them as mindless yes men, just nodding along with whatever the king says.
A lot of people do, yeah.
But the great ones, according to this text, were basically wizards of influence. They were absolute masters of applied psychology. They managed to make the king feel more kingly, they made their peers deeply fear their proximity to power, and they often ended up holding more functional day-to-day power than the actual ruler.
All without ever wearing the target of the crown on their own head.
Exactly, which is the real trick.
They mastered the accumulation of invisible influence rather than relying on the brute, visible force of authority. They operated in the shadows, pulling the levers while the ruler stood in the blinding light.
Which begs the question, if the entire environment operates on this unstable gravitational pull of a leader's ego, how does an ordinary person actually mold their behavior to survive that? How do you engineer the persona of a perfect courtier?
Well, the source material is highly specific about this. It starts with the foundational architecture of your outward appearance and your emotional output.
Yeah.
And the very first law it establishes is to avoid ostentation.
Right. It aggressively warns against prattling on about your own achievements. The text argues that the more you talk about your own deeds, the more suspicion you generate.
And worse, you stir up the most toxic element in any court: envy.
Oh, envy is a killer.
It really is. Envy leads directly to backstabbing and treachery. So your baseline posture should always be modesty.
To drive this home, the text pulls from the 18th century Russian writer Ivan Krylov. He wrote a fable about two dogs that honestly perfectly encapsulates this dynamic.
Barbos and Juju.
Yeah. I found this story genuinely devastating, especially for anyone who prides themselves on their work ethic.
It hits a little too close to home.
It really does.
Yeah.
So you have Barbos, who is this faithful, gritty, hardworking yard dog. He serves his master with absolute zeal. He sleeps outside in the freezing rain. He guards the property from thieves. He's doing the real work.
The heavy lifting.
Exactly. And one afternoon, Barbos looks up at the house and sees his old acquaintance, Juju, who is this tiny, curly-haired lapdog. And Juju is just resting on a plush-down cushion by an open window.
Beating off silver plates, probably.
Basically. And Barbos is just bewildered. He approaches the window, practically weeping with emotion at the sheer unfairness of it all. And he asks Juju, "What sort of life are you leading now? We used to suffer hunger together out here in the yard. What is your present service like?"
And Juju looks down from his cushion amidst the soft carpets and casually explains that he just frolics with the master.
Right. Frolics. So Barbos, hanging his head, details his own miserable reality. He says he suffers cold and hunger, sleeps on the hard ground, gets drenched. And if he happens to bark at the wrong time while literally trying to do his job, he gets whipped.
It's brutal.
And then Barbos asks the core question. He says, How did you, Juju, who are always so small and weak, get taken into such favor while I jump out of my skin to no purpose? What is it you actually do?
And Juju looks down with this mocking pity and replies, "What is it I do?" A pretty question to ask. I walk upon my hind legs.
I mean, I have to push back on the implications of this, because if we accept this premise, isn't just a prescription for total nihilism?
It feels that way, yes.
Like, is the text literally saying that grueling, honest, hard work, the Barbos approach, is entirely useless compared to just performing cute, visible tricks for the boss? Are we being told to abandon substance for performance?
It feels incredibly cynical, I know. But we have to look at the specific nature of court society that the fable is critiquing. It isn't saying that hard work doesn't need to happen. I mean, someone obviously has to guard the yard or the whole enterprise collapses.
Right, the work has to get done.
Exactly. What it's saying is that in the realm of power and high-level influence, appearances will almost always outweigh raw toil. The person sitting on the throne does not want to see your sweat.
They don't want to see how the sausage is made.
Precisely. They do not want to be confronted with the grueling, agonizing reality of how the machinery operates. They want the illusion of graceful accomplishment.
The text actually gives this a specific name. It calls it practicing nonchalance, which ties into that Renaissance concept of sprezzatura, right?
Yes, exactly. Your talent must appear to flow as naturally as water. It needs an inherent ease that leads people to assume you are a natural-born genius rather than a frantic, exhausted workaholic.
Even if you are a frantic workaholic behind the scenes.
Especially if you are. Even when a massive project demands absolute blood, sweat, and tears behind closed doors, the perfect courtier presents the final result as if they just dashed it off in a moment of light inspiration.
Because to publicly display your toil is, in a very real way, a form of ostentation.
It is, because it makes people uncomfortable. It provides guilt instead of pleasure. No one wants to look out their window at the freezing, miserable dog guarding their house because it forces them to acknowledge the human cost of their comfort.
Wow, yeah, that makes so much sense.
But everyone wants to look at the lapdog doing a little dance. Juju walking on his hind legs isn't just a trick. It's a metaphor for making the difficult look delightfully, effortlessly entertaining.
And this philosophy of reducing interpersonal friction, it ties directly into the next core element of the courtier's persona, which is using politeness as a strategic currency.
Yes, Schopenhauer's concept.
Yeah. The text incorporates a quote from the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer that profoundly shifted how I view social pleasantries. Schopenhauer says that politeness is an avowedly false coin, and that it is sheer foolishness to be stingy with it.
His analogy here is one of the sharpest psychological insights in the entire document, honestly. He compares human nature to wax.
Okay, walk us through that.
So in its natural baseline state, wax is hard, brittle, and unyielding. If you try to force it, it just breaks. But if you apply just a slight amount of warmth, that wax becomes soft. It becomes entirely pliable.
It melts a little.
Right, it will take whatever shape you mold it into. Schopenhauer observes that human nature is naturally crabbed, defensive, and malevolent. We walk around with our guards up, hard and brittle. Politeness is the warmth.
That is brilliant. So the revelation here is that by being intensely polite, you aren't necessarily expressing a deep, genuine affection for the person standing in front of you.
Not at all.
You are applying strategic warmth to alter their physical state. You are melting them down to make them pliable and obliging to your goals.
It is a deliberate tool of social lubrication. You spend this false coin generously because it bypasses their rational defenses. It smooths the gears of the court.
And to utilize this tool effectively, without just looking like a chaotic sycophant, the courtier has to achieve absolute mastery over their own emotional landscape.
The mastery of the mass.
Yes. The text explicitly states that you must learn to be an actor in a grand play. You have to train yourself to cry and laugh on command whenever the social current demands it.
Which sounds exhausting.
Completely exhausting.
Yeah.
You must be able to completely disguise your frustration and feign enthusiastic agreement, even when you're internally screaming at the incompetence around you.
The 17th century French writer Jean de la Bruyère is quoted here, and he paints a rather chilling picture of this existence. He says, "The master of the court controls his gestures, actively belies his own heart, and speaks and acts in direct opposition to his true feelings."
He calls it being impenetrable.
Impenetrable, yes. That is the ideal state.
And what's fascinating is that this mastery of the mask isn't just about hiding negative emotions. It extends to how you modulate your communication style based on who is in the room. Like, the text fiercely attacks what it calls the pseudo-belief in equality.
Oh, this is a big one for modern workplaces. The highly romanticized notion that you should speak and act exactly the same way with everyone, regardless of their rank, status, or background.
Because it somehow proves your authenticity.
Right. But the text argues that this is not authenticity at all. It's narcissism. It's a terrible strategic error.
How so?
Well, if you speak to your subordinates with the exact same blunt, casual shorthand you use with your closest peers, they're likely to interpret it as a form of arrogant condescension.
That makes sense.
And conversely, if you speak to your superiors with the same breezy familiarity you use with your friends, they will be deeply, quietly offended by your lack of deference.
Even if modern corporate culture dictates, they smile and pretend they aren't offended.
Exactly. You have to dynamically alter your vocabulary, your tone, and your posture to suit the specific reality of the person you're interacting with.
It requires immense, draining situational awareness. You have to constantly read the room, diagnose the specific insecurities of the ego in front of you, and adjust your frequency to match theirs perfectly.
It's constant calibration.
All right, let's map out the progression here. You have learned the foundational rules. You avoid ostentation. You practice nonchalance so your achievements look like magic. You deploy the warm wax of politeness to soften your rivals, and you possess an impenetrable emotional mask.
You look the part.
Right, you are the perfect juju. But looking the part is passive. How do you actively use this carefully constructed persona to alter the trajectory of the person sitting on the throne, and do it without triggering their paranoia and getting destroyed in the process?
That is the ultimate test, managing the master. And the first, most absolute rule of managing a master is fully internalizing the lethal nature of direct criticism.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the text provides a historical scenario that perfectly illustrates the catastrophic cost of failing to understand this. It involves Alexander the Great and a philosopher named Callisthenes.
Right. Alexander, as many know, was tutored in his youth by Aristotle. He possessed a genuine love for philosophy and intellect.
He wasn't just a brute conqueror.
No, not at all. During his massive, grueling military campaigns conquering the known world, he lamented that he lacked intellectual peers to debate deep philosophical matters with. So Aristotle, hearing this, suggests Alexander take Callisthenes, who is a brilliant, highly educated former pupil, along on the campaign.
Now, Aristotle understood power. He'd actually tried to teach Callisthenes the subtle skills of courtiership, but Callisthenes fundamentally rejected them.
He was a purist.
Completely, he was an intellectual purist. He believed in unadorned logic, objective truth, and speaking his mind without filter. His internal logic was seemingly bulletproof. He figured, Alexander loves learning. He asked for a philosopher. Surely a man of his intellect will not object to a smart advisor pointing out a flaw in his logic.
It is the classic fatal trap of the highly intelligent subordinate. The assumption that a leader's stated outward desire for the unvarnished truth somehow supersedes their fragile human ego.
Which is a delusion. We've all fallen for it.
Oh, absolutely.
So during one of the major campaigns, Callisthenes does what he thinks he was hired to do. He speaks his mind, he points out a flaw, he criticizes Alexander directly and logically, and what is the response of this great enlightened philosopher king?
He has Callisthenes put to death.
Executed, just like that. The text distills this down to a chilling maxim. Honesty is a fool's game.
It sounds incredibly bleak. But analyze the psychology of power for a second. When you criticize a master directly, regardless of how accurate, data-backed, or helpful your criticism is, they do not hear the data.
They only see the messenger.
Exactly. They see a direct challenge to their authority. They see a subordinate who implicitly believes they possess superior judgment. The logic is entirely eclipsed by the threat to their status.
I mean, I see this constantly in modern postmortems for failed projects. The junior engineer who told the VP the code wouldn't work is the one who gets quietly managed out, while the VP survives.
It happens every day.
But this leaves us with a massive operational problem. If direct honesty gets you executed, literally or corporately, how do you actually stop a leader from driving the company off a cliff?
You deploy the brilliance of indirection, and the text offers a masterstroke of this technique, contrasting Callisthenes with the courtiers of ancient China.
This is where the artistry really comes in. Because in ancient China, the emperor was not merely a political head of state, he was viewed as a literal divine force of nature.
Right, the mandate of heaven.
Exactly. His kingdom was the center of the cosmos. Therefore, to criticize any of his policy decisions was to essentially declare that the divine order of the universe was flawed.
So imagine the stakes of being a minister in that environment. You realize the emperor's new agricultural tax is going to cause a massive famine.
You can't just send an email.
You definitely cannot. You cannot simply request an audience and say, Your Majesty, this tax policy is economically disastrous. To speak a direct cautionary word was literally treason, but emperors are human. They make catastrophic errors.
So the courtiers had to invent a mechanism to warn the emperor without ever physically speaking a warning.
And their solution was an act of pure genius. They utilized the official royal chronicles, known as the 21 Histories.
Every dynasty meticulously maintained these records, right? Census figures, military campaigns, daily events.
Yes. But critically, each history contained a specific chapter dedicated to unusual events. And the ministers, when they needed to correct the emperor's course, would intentionally fabricate reports of bizarre, unnatural phenomena and insert them into this official chapter.
Like what kind of phenomena?
They would document sightings of two-headed sheep being born in the provinces, or formations of geese flying backward, or stars suddenly appearing in the wrong hemisphere.
Geese flying backward. That is amazing. So the emperor would read these official, highly formal reports of geese flying backward. And because his entire worldview was predicated on his actions dictating the balance of nature, he would process this data and conclude.
What? He would conclude, the cosmos is fundamentally unbalanced. My recent actions must have caused this disharmony.
And he would independently decide to repeal the tax policy.
Exactly. The courtiers managed to completely reverse the emperor's behavior without a single individual ever stepping forward to say, you made a mistake.
It is the ultimate manifestation of disappearing behind the warning. You completely remove the human element, the ego threat, from the equation. The advice becomes an impersonal force of nature.
Which is brilliant.
The critique we received mentioned that my previous analogy for this was a bit weak. The idea of just forwarding your boss an article about a competitor. Let's dig deeper into how you actually apply this Chinese courtier magic today.
Okay, let's explore that.
It's not about sending a link. It's about manipulating the environment so the leader discovers the flaw themselves. Suppose the CEO wants to launch a product that you know will cannibalize your main revenue stream. You don't tell them that. Instead, you arrange for a highly complex, seemingly innocent financial modeling meeting.
You set the stage.
Right. You ask the CEO a specific, granular question about resource allocation that forces them to do the math on the whiteboard. You guide them into the intellectual cul-de-sac until they step back, look at the numbers they just wrote, and say, wait a minute, this is going to cannibalize our main product. We need to pivot.
You let them experience the epiphany.
Exactly. You let them be the savior.
That is the exact mechanism. You are managing the ego by making them the author of the correction. And sometimes managing the master isn't just about steering them away from disaster. It's about actively, theatrically feeding their vanity.
Which brings us to the French architect Jules Mansart and King Louis XIV, the Sun King.
This is arguably the most manipulative, brilliant tactic in the entire document.
It really is.
Yeah.
So Mansart was commissioned to design additions to the spectacular gardens at Versailles. Mansart was an undeniably brilliant architect, but he possessed the emotional intelligence to realize that in the court of the Sun King, raw technical talent was secondary.
His primary job was to make Louis XIV feel like a living god.
Right, so he engineered a very specific presentation technique.
When Mansart would draft his intricate architectural plans, he would intentionally embed an obvious, glaring flaw.
An intentional mistake.
Yes, a mathematical error in a sightline or a disproportionate geometric shape, usually in an area like the gardens, which wasn't his strict specialty anyway.
He would then take these sabotage plans and present them to the king. And the king would scrutinize the drawings, and exactly as Mansart had orchestrated, the king's finger would land directly on the intentional mistake. The king would point it out and proudly dictate the geometric solution.
And this is the critical moment where the mastery of the mask is deployed.
Because Mansart doesn't just nod and say, "Good catch, sir, I'll fix it."
Oh, no.
The text describes how he would physically recoil in astonishment. He would exclaim, loud enough for the surrounding courtiers to hear, that he would never have spotted the subtle problem that the king's divine eye had so masterfully diagnosed and resolved.
He would practically vibrate with theatrical admiration.
Loudly confessing that next to the architectural genius of the king, he was nothing but a lowly pupil.
We have to look at the tangible return on investment of this blatant ego stroking. By the age of 30, despite being significantly younger and less experienced than his rivals, Mansart was awarded the commission for the entire enlargement of Versailles.
Unbelievable.
He became the most powerful architect in France.
Because he understood a psychological truth that Callisthenes died ignoring. The most valuable skill you can offer a powerful person is not your flawless technical execution. It is your ability to construct an environment where they feel more talented, more perceptive, and more brilliant than anyone else in the room.
Louis XIV did not want to hire the best architect in the world. He wanted to hire the architect who provided the mirror that reflected Louis himself as the best architect in the world.
So indirection and theatrical flattery are your offensive weapons. But the text also lays down a rapid-fire sequence of defensive rules for interacting with the throne.
And these are crucial.
First, never be the bearer of bad news. It sounds like a cliche, but the psychology is real. The king literally associates the negative emotion of the news with the face of the messenger.
You must orchestrate it so that the inevitable terrible news is delivered by a colleague, a subordinate, or an automated report.
You only ever physically carry the good news.
Second, never affect easy chumminess or intimacy. We touched on this earlier with the pseudo-belief in equality. The master does not want a best friend. They want a subordinate.
The text strongly advises that unless the master explicitly, repeatedly demands a casual tone, you must always maintain a buffer of formal deference.
And third, and this is what people constantly destroy their careers, never impugn their taste.
Never. Taste is the softest, most vulnerable underbelly of the human ego. You can challenge a leader's operational budget and they might debate you. But if you question their aesthetic judgment, their sense of style, or their artistic preferences,
You are attacking their soul.
you really are. And the text highlights this with the story of Pope Urban VIII. He was a man of immense religious and political power, but his deepest, most desperate desire was to be remembered by history as a magnificent poet.
The objective reality, however, was that his poetry was agonizingly terrible.
Just awful. So in 1629, a duke sent an ambassador named Testi to the Vatican for a diplomatic mission.
We actually have the letters Testi wrote back to the Duke describing this ordeal. It's fascinating. After concluding their official state business, the Pope's demeanor shifts. He pulls out a thick bundle of parchment, smiles warmly, and informs Testi that he would like him to listen to some of his recent compositions. And then the Pope proceeds to recite two incredibly long, mind-numbing poems.
Testi is trapped in a nightmare scenario. He is a sophisticated man of letters. He knows this is drivel, but he cannot say, "Your Holiness, the meter is completely off."
So he deploys the warm wax.
Exactly. He interrupts the Pope after every stanza with lavish, breathless praise, and when the recitation finally ends, Testi physically kneels on the floor and kisses the Pope's foot, declaring his overwhelming gratitude for the unusual benevolence of being allowed to hear such divine art.
The manipulation was entirely successful.
It worked perfectly.
And when the Duke himself visited the Vatican sometime later, he escalated the tactic. The Duke had actually taken the time to memorize entire verses of the Pope's atrocious poetry, and he casually recited them back to the Pope during conversation.
That is dedication to the bit.
It is. The text notes that this specific act of validating his taste made the Pope so jubilant he practically lost his mind with joy.
It's the ultimate confirmation of the rule. In matters of personal taste, there is no such thing as being too obsequious. If the CEO writes a terrible LinkedIn post, you tell them it shifted your paradigm.
Absolutely. So managing the ruler is a grueling, high-stakes psychological operation. You are constantly assessing their baseline mood, feeding their vanity, and actively suppressing your own brilliance to let them shine.
But as the source text starkly warns, the person on the throne is not the only thread in the room.
That is a crucial pivot in the text philosophy. It describes the court not just as a hierarchy, but as a vast stew of resentments, fears, and powerful envy.
You aren't just managing the king's ego, you have to survive the toxic swamp of your peers.
And navigating the peers and subordinates who surround you requires a completely different set of defensive maneuvers. And the most volatile, destructive emotion in that stew is, without a doubt, envy.
To illustrate how to neutralize envy, the text brings in the brilliant English landscape painter J.M.W. Turner. Turner was a generational talent, specifically renowned for his mastery of color. He could paint these iridescent, luminous skies that seemed to literally emit light off the canvas.
His technical superiority was so glaring that it actually terrified his contemporaries. Other artists would actively lobby gallery owners to ensure their paintings were not hung anywhere near Turner's.
Because the sheer brilliance of his golden skies would render everything around them flat, muddy, and lifeless by comparison.
Right. So another highly respected painter, Sir Thomas Lawrence, experiences the ultimate misfortune. He arrives at an upcoming exhibition to find that Turner's newest masterpiece, a painting titled Cologne, has been hung directly between two of Lawrence's own works.
Lawrence is crushed. He complains bitterly to the gallery owner, pacing and agonizing, but the curation is set. The paintings cannot be moved.
Turner eventually catches wind of Lawrence's bitter public complaining. Now, Turner understands the ecosystem of the swamp. He knows that his continued success does not just rely on the wealthy patrons who buy his art.
It relies on the goodwill of gallery owners, the consensus of critics, and the implicit support of his fellow artists.
Exactly. If he allows Lawrence's deep humiliation to fester, that envy will inevitably metastasize into a coordinated campaign to sabotage Turner's reputation.
So what is Turner's solution? It is an act of staggering discipline. Before the exhibition officially opens its doors to the public, Turner takes a mixture of dull lamp black, essentially a dark, muddy, temporary watercolor wash.
And he physically paints it directly over his own radiant golden sky in Cologne.
He intentionally defaces his own masterpiece to temporarily plunge it into dullness, perfectly matching the mediocrity of Lawrence's paintings beside it.
A close friend of Turner's walks into the gallery, sees the ruined sky, and is completely horrified. He demands, "What have you done to your picture?"
And Turner, practicing ultimate nonchalance, calmly replies, "Well, poor Lawrence was so unhappy. And it's only lampblack. It will wash off after the exhibition."
I want to pause and just marvel at the emotional regulation that requires.
It's incredible. He intentionally dulled his own historic brilliance to absorb the hostility of a peer. Think about the modern equivalent. You just closed the biggest sales quarter in the history of the company. Instead of popping champagne in the bullpen and posting about it, you quietly tell your peers, "Honestly, I just got incredibly lucky with the timing of the market, and I'm exhausted."
You downplay the victory.
Turner knew he could wash the literal black off the canvas later, but he knew he could never wash off the permanent career-ending stain of a bitter rival's coordinated sabotage.
It is a profound survival tactic for top performers. Sometimes shining at your absolute brightest in the immediate moment makes you an irresistible target. You have to possess the strategic foresight to temporarily dim your own light to maintain the equilibrium of the swamp.
And navigating that equilibrium becomes exponentially harder when the swamp contains multiple people who all believe they are the center of the universe.
The dilemma of satisfying multiple masters simultaneously.
Yes. The text details a brilliant historical resolution to this in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars. Is 1814 the Congress of Vienna. Napoleon has been exiled, and the victorious powers of Europe have descended on the city to carve up the continent. It is an absolute powder keg of monumental egos.
The organizers commission a highly respected painter, Jean-Baptiste Isabey, to immortalize this tense diplomatic negotiation in a grand epic painting.
And the moment Isabey arrives to begin his sketches, Talleyrand, the legendary cunning negotiator representing France, pulls the painter into a private room. Talleyrand essentially dictates, "Given my historical importance and my role here, I expect to occupy the absolute center stage in this painting."
Isabey, playing the perfect courtier, bows and cordially agrees.
But the crisis arrives a few days later. The Duke of Wellington, the legendary military hero of the English forces and the conqueror of Napoleon, approaches Isabey with the exact same demand. "I am the victor," Wellington implies. "I must be the undisputed center of attention."
Isabey, maintaining his impenetrable mask, smiles and assures the Duke that it will be so.
So Isabey retreats to his studio, facing a seemingly impossible geometric and political paradox. He has promised the center of a single canvas to the two most volatile egos in Europe.
If he visually favors the French, he insults the English, potentially derailing the actual treaty negotiations. He could literally trigger a renewed international conflict with a brushstroke.
So he is forced to deploy genius-level visual diplomacy. When the massive painting is finally unveiled to the assembled powers, both Talleyrand and Wellington look at it and are completely, deeply satisfied. Isabey survived. How did he manipulate the space?
He utilized the difference between psychological focus and physical geometry. He painted the scene so that the Duke of Wellington is depicted just stepping into the grand hall through a doorway on the far right side of the canvas.
But he painted every single face in the crowded room turned toward the door, staring in awe at Wellington.
Wellington is the psychological center of the narrative. He commands the attention of the room.
But who is physically seated in a chair right in the exact dead center millimeter of the canvas?
Talleyrand.
Isabey safely navigated the Scylla and Charybdis of dual masters by giving each ego their own distinct interpretation of supremacy. He gave Wellington the narrative center and Talleyrand the literal center, satisfying both without stirring the resentment of either.
It is a beautiful compromise, but the text makes it clear that navigating the swamp isn't always about these grand, complex, diplomatic high-wire acts.
Right. Frequently, survival relies on the most mundane, counterintuitive rule imaginable, staying strictly within your assigned lane.
And the text provides a shockingly brutal story from ancient China to drive this home.
This anecdote is harsh, but it exposes the rigid, unforgiving architecture of court structure. It occurs during the reign of ruler Chao. One afternoon, Chao indulges in too much wine, wanders into the palace gardens, and passes out on a stone bench.
As the afternoon wanes, the temperature drops significantly.
Passing through the gardens is the official court crown keeper. This man has one singular, highly specific duty in the entire vast bureaucracy of the palace. He manages the ruler's head apparel, nothing else.
He sees his master shivering in his sleep.
Driven by a basic human impulse to be helpful and perhaps gain a little favor, the crown keeper removes his own warm coat, gently drapes it over the sleeping ruler, and quietly departs.
Hours later, ruler Chao wakes up. He notices the foreign coat, feels the warmth, and asks his attending guards who placed it over him. They inform him it was the crown keeper.
Now, a logical person assumes the crown keeper is about to get a promotion.
Instead, Chao immediately summons the official coat keeper, the minister whose explicit job description is to manage the ruler's physical comfort and clothing, and severely punishes him for his gross negligence.
But then, Chao summons the crown keeper, the man who actually saved him from freezing, and orders him to be beheaded.
The modern mind rebels against this.
It totally does. It seems like the action of a psychotic tyrant punishing an act of pure kindness.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, overstepping your bounds, even to help, is a fatal error in a court. The text explains exactly why this is a catastrophic blunder. In a highly structured hierarchy, doing more than you are assigned does not make you look like a highly motivated go-getter.
It makes you look subversive.
Right. Doing extra work outside your purview looks like you are trying desperately to curry favor, or worse, that you are trying to cover up a deficiency in your actual assigned duties.
If you are the crown keeper, your entire existence is the crown. By executing the coat keeper's job, you publicly humiliated the coat keeper, breeding instant, lethal resentment.
But more dangerously, you highlighted a critical vulnerability in the ruler's security apparatus. You demonstrated that the system is broken, and you took it upon yourself to act outside the established boundaries of power.
The lesson the text extracts is rigid and clear. Execute the tasks you are assigned to the absolute maximum of your abilities, and never ever do more.
Save your excess creative energy and ambition for your life outside the court. Do not play the hero if heroism is not explicitly written into your job description.
I could feel people listening to this and just suffocating. I mean, we've talked about surviving this swamp by hiding your brilliance, painting over your masterpieces, pleasing multiple impossible egos, and staying rigidly, silently in your assigned lane.
It's a lot to ask of a person.
What if you don't want to just survive in the swamp until you retire? What if you are trapped in a toxic court and you desperately want to escape?
The text anticipates that desire, actually, and offers a blueprint for escape focusing on the Italian Renaissance painter Fra Filippo Lippi.
This is an incredible historical detour. Lippi is sailing off the coast of Italy with some companions when their ship is attacked by Moorish pirates. Lippi is captured, hauled off to the Barbary coast, and literally sold into slavery.
He spends 18 agonizing months toiling in physical chains.
He is the ultimate captive in the most brutal court imaginable. But Lippi possesses a highly specialized, rare talent.
One day, while working, Lippi finds a piece of burnt coal left over from a fire. He walks over to a blank white wall and, while still wearing his heavy iron chains, uses the charcoal to sketch a massive, magnificent, hyper-realistic portrait of his owner.
You have to understand, the level of perspective and artistic skill Lippi possessed was practically alien to that specific region at that time.
When the owner discovers this incredibly lifelike, majestic rendering of himself, he is completely astounded. He doesn't view it as just a drawing. He views it as a miracle.
He is so profoundly flattered by the image that he instantly orders Lippi freed from his chains. He then employs Lippi, shooting him with honor, using him to paint portraits of all the visiting local elites to show off his newfound status symbol.
Eventually, out of sheer gratitude for the prestige Lippi's talent brought to his court, the owner ensures Lippi is safely returned to Italy.
The text distills such a potent, empowering takeaway from this captivity narrative. It proposes that, metaphorically, We're all, at some point, captured by pirates.
We are all bound to systems, bosses, or corporate structures that we despise. We are toiling for others.
But almost everyone possesses some specific gift, some specialized talent or knowledge base they execute better than anyone else in their environment.
The strategy is not to hoard that talent or use it to rebel. The strategy is to utilize your talent as a magnificent gift to your captor. You leverage your skill to elevate their status.
Let them take the public credit for your brilliance temporarily.
By doing so, you transform your talent from a tool of mere labor into a powerful tool of leverage. You use the master's own vanity to eventually buy your freedom, whether that translates to negotiating a transfer, securing a massive severance package, or building the network you need to launch your own firm.
It's transactional alchemy. You leverage their ego against your own talent to unlock the door.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. But it requires immense patience. Because as we transition into the next phase of the text, we are presented with the reality that even the most talented, well-positioned individuals, people who have successfully navigated the swamp and sit right beside the throne, can completely self-destruct in an instant.
If they forget their place and violate the cardinal rules.
Fatal mistakes and the absolute limits of influence.
We've studied the master classes in survival, and now we have to look at the spectacular failures. The cautionary tales of people who possessed it all and just threw it away. And the most common seductive trap is the danger of wit.
To explore this, we look at Beau Brummel. In late 18th century London, Brummel was not just a participant in high society, he dictated it. He was the ultimate authority on fashion, the original dandy.
He popularized the wearing of perfectly tailored trousers instead of breeches. He spent hours perfecting the exact knot of his cravat.
His influence was so absolute that if Beau Brummel glanced at your boots and raised an eyebrow, you threw those boots in the fire.
And his most devoted disciple was none other than the Prince of Wales, the future King George IV. The prince, who fancied himself a highly fashionable man, brought Brummel into his absolute inner circle, granted him a lucrative royal pension, and treated him as his favorite companion.
The prince adored Brummel not just for his fashion, but for his sharp, biting wit. Brummel's sarcastic tongue was his trademark.
But Brummel made the most fatal error a courtier can make. He got too comfortable.
He became intoxicated by his own proximity to power.
He forgot the fundamental law we discussed earlier. Never affect easy chumminess or intimacy with your master. He felt so permanently secure in his elevated status that he began treating the prince not as his royal patron, but as an equal.
Worse than an equal. He started using his trademark wit to poke fun at the prince's physical appearance.
The prince was beginning to gain a significant amount of weight, which was obviously a massive insecurity for a man obsessed with fashion. So Brummel, thinking he was untouchable, starts secretly referring to the Prince of Wales by the nickname Big Ben.
And then comes the explosive breaking point. They are at an elegant dinner party. The service is unusually slow. Brummel, seated right next to the prince, turns to him and drawls, "Do ring, Big Ben."
Oh my God.
He actually issues a direct command to the future King of England, utilizing an insulting, fat-shaming nickname to his face in front of an audience of peers.
The heir must have just left the room.
The prince calmly reaches over and rings the bell. The valet immediately arrives, and the prince looks at the valet and orders him to show Mr. Brummel the door and to ensure he is never admitted to the royal presence again.
In a span of 5 seconds, the entire foundation of Brummel's life evaporates.
Brummel is physically escorted out. His royal pension is immediately severed. Because his entire social power was derived wholly from the prince's backing, his creditors instantly descend upon him.
His massive debts crush him. His fair-weather friends abandon him. He flees to France to escape debtor's prison, and he eventually dies deranged, diseased, and in pitiable poverty in an asylum.
The rule the text extracts is mercilessly absolute. Never joke about appearances or taste, especially with a master.
It does not matter if you are the recognized global arbiter of taste. It does not matter if your sharp wit is the exact reason they hired you in the first place. A joke is a tiny dagger.
The moment you use that dagger to pierce the master's ego, you have dug your own grave. The gutters of history are overflowing with brilliant people who couldn't resist making one final perfect joke at their boss's expense.
It reveals a profound lack of structural awareness. Brummel mistakenly believed his power was intrinsic to himself, forgetting that he was merely a moon reflecting the prince's sun.
Which leads us to the next fatal mistake. Misunderstanding the illusion of control and asking for too much.
This dynamic is explored through the story of Alfonso III, the King of Aragon, and his servant. This servant approaches King Alfonso one morning with a clever little scheme. He bows and says, "Sire, I had a truly wonderful dream last night. I dreamed that you, in your infinite generosity, bestowed upon me a magnificent gift of new weapons, fine horses, and beautiful clothes."
Now, Alfonso is a deeply lordly, traditionally generous monarch. He recognizes the servant's cleverness and finds the whimsical nature of the request amusing.
He decides to play the role of the benevolent, omnipotent God.
He snaps his fingers and promptly grants the servant exactly what he dreamed of: the weapons, the horses, the clothes.
The servant is ecstatic. He thinks he has just discovered a glitch in the matrix. He waits a suitable amount of time, lets the dust settle, and then returns to the king. He bows low and says, "Sire, a miracle. I had another dream last night. This time, I dreamed you gave me a massive, heavy chest of gold florins."
And this is where the dynamic violently shifts. King Alfonso's warm, benevolent demeanor vanishes. He looks at the servant with a cold, hard stare, smiles thinly, and says, "Do not believe in dreams from now on. They lie."
And he dismisses the man, giving him absolutely nothing. The text's psychological autopsy of this interaction is brilliant. Why did the exact same tactic work flawlessly the first time and fail so spectacularly the second?
Because of the subtle shift in who was actually holding the power. The first time, King Alfonso was entirely in control of the narrative. The servant presented a whimsical, harmless scenario, and the king actively chose to engage in the play.
Bestowing the horses fed the king's self-image as a magnanimous, wealthy lord who could make dreams come true on a whim. It was a pleasure.
But the second time, the charm was dead. The illusion of play was gone. It devolved into a transparent, mechanical con game. The servant was attempting to force the king's hand using a predictable formula.
The text lays down a crucial rule here. Be frugal in asking for favors. It is always, always better to earn favors through your nonchalant labor so that the ruler bestows them willingly out of their own desire to feel generous.
The moment you corner them, the moment you force them into a position where they have to actively reject your request, you stir up deep resentment. You remind them that you are a liability, a drain on their resources, rather than a seamless source of pleasure.
You must orchestrate your environment so that you never give a master the opportunity to practice saying the word no to you. It sets a dangerous psychological precedent in their mind.
And what's truly terrifying about this text is that it argues this submissive, highly calibrated approach isn't just for dealing with your literal, direct boss.
It argues you must play the perfect courtier even when you are dealing with individuals who aren't technically your master at all.
Yes, the concept of the ecosystem of influence or mutual dependence. We see this perfectly illustrated with a highly unexpected historical figure, Winston Churchill.
Following World War II, Winston Churchill is arguably the most famous, respected statesman on the planet. He is a global icon. In his private time, he is also a passionate, dedicated amateur painter.
An American publisher named Henry Luce, the incredibly wealthy and powerful man who founded Time and Life magazines, acquires one of Churchill's landscape paintings and hangs it in his corporate office in New York.
Sometime later, Churchill is visiting New York. He visits Luce's office, and the two men are standing together, examining the painting on the wall. Luce, who is undeniably a powerful media titan, but certainly not a historical giant on Churchill's level, casually gestures to the canvas.
And he remarks, "It's a very good picture, Mr. Prime Minister, but I think it needs something in the foreground. A sheep, perhaps, right down there."
I want you to feel the sheer audacity of that moment. A magazine publisher, a complete amateur, telling the savior of Britain, a man who stared down fascism, how to fix his landscape painting.
Luce realizes almost instantly that he has committed a massive faux pas. The next day, Churchill's secretary calls Luce's office and brusquely asks for the painting to be unhooked and shipped back to England immediately.
Luce is completely mortified. He is convinced he has deeply, irreparably offended one of the greatest men of the century.
But the story doesn't end there. A few days later, a crate arrives at Luce's office. The painting has been shipped back from London, and when Luce unwraps it, he sees that Churchill has slightly altered the canvas.
There, peacefully grazing in the foreground, exactly where Luce had pointed, is a single, newly painted sheep.
Churchill actually took the note. He physically altered his art.
The question the text poses is profound. Why? In terms of historical stature, global fame, and raw authority, Churchill was vastly superior to Henry Luce. Why would this titan swallow his pride and bow to the pedestrian artistic critique of a publisher?
Because Churchill, despite his bluster, possessed a flawless understanding of the modern decentralized court. The arena of international statesmanship, of post-war diplomacy, and of global media is an intricate, fragile web of mutual dependence.
Luce did not have political authority over Churchill, but Luce controlled platforms. He controlled the narrative in America.
Churchill understood that it is universally unwise to insult the ego or the taste of individuals who hold leverage, even if they sit below you on the traditional org chart.
If a man with the ego and historical weight of Winston Churchill can quiet his pride, pick up a brush, and paint a sheep just to stroke the vanity of a media baron, it proves that courtiership isn't about weakness. It's about ruthless pragmatism.
He recognized that the microscopic indignity of painting a sheep was an incredibly cheap price to pay for the continued enthusiastic goodwill of the American press. It's practical magic.
Magic is exactly the right framework. Because when you synthesize all of these rules, when you master the indirection of the Chinese histories, the flattery of Mansart, the emotional mask of La Bruyere, the strategic submission of Churchill's sheep, you are essentially operating as an illusionist.
You are manufacturing a bespoke reality so perfectly that the people around you only perceive what you design them to perceive.
But every illusion has a breaking point. What happens when the trick fails? What happens when a slight miscalculation causes the curtain to slip and the master actually sees the machinery?
So what does this all mean? That brings us to the final and undoubtedly most vital narrative in our deep dive today. A story that serves as the ultimate warning, the unmasking of Talleyrand.
We discussed Talleyrand earlier, orchestrating the Congress of Vienna. He was the consummate aristocratic French survivor. He navigated the bloody chaos of the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and the shifting political winds with flawless grace.
And now he finds himself serving a brand new, highly complex master, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Understanding the social dynamic between these two men is critical to understanding the disaster that follows.
Talleyrand descends from ancient, refined, fabulously wealthy French nobility. He is the epitome of Parisian sophistication. Napoleon, conversely, is a brilliant, world-conquering military genius, but socially and politically, he is an outsider.
He is from the provincial island of Corsica. In the eyes of the entrenched old-money Parisian elite like Talleyrand, Napoleon is a bit of a rough, uncultured rube who happens to have a very big army.
So they're feeling each other out, establishing their dynamic. Napoleon casually mentions to Talleyrand that he would very much enjoy coming out to Talleyrand's sprawling country estate in the suburbs of Paris for a relaxed afternoon lunch.
Talleyrand, the perfect host, cordially agrees and suggests that after their meal, the general might amuse himself with a bit of shooting in the nearby massive park, the Bois de Boulogne.
And this is where Napoleon reviews his provincial roots. He replies, "I do not care for shooting, but I love hunting. Tell me, are there any wild boars in the park?"
Now, boar hunting was a rugged, dangerous, deep forest rural sport. Asking if there are packs of wild boars roaming around a highly manicured, civilized Parisian park is deeply absurd.
It's the equivalent of a tourist asking the mayor of New York if they can go grizzly bear hunting in Central Park. It betrays a total lack of sophistication.
Exactly. Now, Talleyrand maintains his mask. He doesn't laugh in Napoleon's face. But internally, the aristocrat cannot resist the urge to play a quiet, condescending, practical joke on his new, uncultured master.
He decides to manufacture an illusion just for his own private amusement. He replies smoothly, without missing a beat, "Very few, mon general, but I dare say you will manage to find one."
The trap is set. The following day, Napoleon arrives at the estate, vibrating with the excitement of the hunt. While Napoleon is inside enjoying his lunch, Talleyrand secretly dispatches his servants to a bustling local meat market in Paris.
They purchase 2 massive, fat, black, domesticated pigs, haul them back to the estate, and quietly release them into the pristine park.
After lunch concludes, Napoleon mounts his hunting horse. At a covert signal from Talleyrand, the servants flush one of the black market pigs out of the brush. Napoleon catches a glimpse of the dark shape, triumphantly shouts, "I see a boar," and goes galloping after it in an absolute frenzy of adrenaline.
He chases this terrified, slow-moving domestic pig around the manicured park for half an hour. He finally corners and captures it, sitting tall in the saddle, feeling like a conquering hero. He is radiating triumph.
But right at the peak of his glory, one of his own senior military aides rides up to inspect the kill. The aide looks closely at the animal. He recognizes it.
And, terrified that the general will be mercilessly mocked by the Parisian elite if he parades a farm animal through the city claiming it's a boar, the aide leans in close to Napoleon and whispers, "Sir, you realize, of course, that this is not a wild boar. It is a market pig.
In a fraction of a second, the illusion violently shatters.
Napoleon flies into a blinding, terrifying rage. He instantly realizes he has been set up. He realizes that the sophisticated, sneering aristocrat Talleyrand has constructed an elaborate theater to make him look like a buffoon.
Napoleon knows that throwing a temper tantrum right there will only make him look more ridiculous, so he tries to swallow it, but his fury is radiating off him.
Talleyrand, watching this from a distance, realizes his private joke has crossed the line into career-ending disaster. The master's ego hasn't just been bruised, it has been completely punctured.
Talleyrand scrambles to deploy a countermeasure to soothe the general. He rushes over and says, "Mon général, a mistake. But do not return to Paris just yet. Let us hunt rabbits instead."
Now, rabbit hunting was a highly traditional, refined, royal pastime. To sweeten the deal and flatter Napoleon's ego, Talleyrand presents him with a set of exquisite, jewel-encrusted hunting rifles that previously belonged to the executed King Louis XVI.
Talleyrand applies massive amounts of the warm wax. He flatters, he defers, he begs. Napoleon eventually agrees to stay for the rabbit hunt, though his ego is still raw. He takes the royal rifles and grumbles, "I'm not Louis XVI. I surely won't kill even one rabbit today."
But when Napoleon and his men ride out into the park that afternoon, the place is miraculously, unbelievably swarming with rabbits. They are everywhere. It's like shooting fish in a barrel.
Napoleon, using the royal guns, shoots at least 50 of them in a matter of hours. His mood completely transforms. The adrenaline returns. He feels masterful, lethal, and victorious. He feels like a king again.
Until the sun begins to set. That exact same military aide approaches Napoleon, his face pale. He leans in and whispers in Napoleon's ear, "To tell the truth, sir, I'm beginning to believe these are not wild rabbits either. They did not run. I suspect that rascal Talleyrand has played another joke on us."
And the aide was absolutely right. While they were eating lunch, Talleyrand had sent his panicked servants back to the market to purchase dozens of tame, domestic, pet rabbits and had them dumped in the grass.
The second illusion shatters, and this time the damage is irreparable.
Napoleon does not yell. He instantly mounts his horse, gallops away from the estate without saying a single word to Talleyrand, and rides straight back to Paris.
Days later, Napoleon sends a chilling threat to Talleyrand, warning him that if the story of the pigs and the tame rabbits ever leaks to the public and he becomes the laughingstock of Paris, there will be brutal consequences.
The historical texts note that it took months for Napoleon to even speak to Talleyrand again, and he never, for the rest of his life, entirely forgave him for the humiliation.
So we have to dissect this failure. What is the core architectural lesson here? Talleyrand was a genius. He read the situation, he understood what his master desired, to feel like a victorious hunter, and he utilized massive resources to successfully provide the exact emotional experience his master wanted.
But it blew up in his face.
The moral of the story reveals the dark, fragile heart of what courtiership actually is. The text explicitly states that courtiers are magicians. They deceptively play with appearances. They construct elaborate, false realities specifically designed to cater to the neuroses and egos of the ruler.
The absolute unbreakable cardinal rule of magic is that you can never ever show the audience how the trick is done.
The sleight of hand must remain invisible or the magic becomes a con.
Precisely. Talleyrand built a brilliant, highly effective trap of flattery, but because of a single overlooked detail, an educated aide who knew the difference between a boar and a pig, the mechanics of his trap were unmasked.
The psychological shift that occurs in a leader's mind when this happens is violent. The moment a master realizes they are being actively manipulated, even if they are being manipulated for their own pleasure and comfort, the power dynamic instantly flips.
They feel helpless.
And you, the courtier, instantly transform in their eyes from a graceful, comforting presence into a loathsome, deceptive rogue.
You transition from being their mirror to being their puppeteer, and no one with an ego wants to realize they are on strings.
The text's final absolute warning is that courtiership is an impossibly subtle art, and an overlooked detail can ruin your most masterful stroke. The ultimate rule is apply exhaustive attention to covering your tracks. Hide the paint, hide the strings, and never ever let your master unmask you.
This has been an incredibly dense, profound journey today. We set out to unpack the laws of the perfect courtier, and we've uncovered a hidden architecture of power that governs almost every human interaction.
We've seen how thriving in the blinding shadow of power requires an almost superhuman level of emotional discipline.
It's about surviving the danger of the court through the brilliant indirection of the Chinese ministers, altering the cosmos. It's about utilizing politeness not as sincerity, but is Schopenhauer's warm wax to melt the brittle defenses of crabbed human nature.
It's about mastering the agonizing restraint required to stay in your lane like the doomed crown keeper. Swallowing your pride to avoid direct criticism and making absolutely certain your master always feels like the genius in the room, just as Jules Mansart did in the Gardens of Versailles.
And if we pull all of this historical analysis back into the present moment, into your daily reality,
Hmm.
you may not be serving a literal sun king, and you may not be terrified of a conquering general.
But you are navigating incredibly fragile egos every single day.
You are managing fraught client relationships, complex office politics, and subtle social hierarchies. Applying these laws, practicing the nonchalance of sprezzatura, so your exhausting labor looks like effortless grace, rigorously avoiding being the bearer of bad news, actively painting lampblack over your own successes to placate the envy of your peers, these are not just historical curiosities.
These are fiercely practical, highly effective tools. Recognizing these invisible dynamics can genuinely be the difference between thriving in your career and finding yourself suddenly, inexplicably exiled from your own modern court.
It is a harsh, somewhat cynical reality to accept, but it is an incredibly empowering one to fully understand, because once you see the strings, you can stop tripping over them. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, slightly disruptive thought to mull over in your own time.
Let's hear it.
We spend so much of our lives, so much of our ambition, culturally conditioned to aspire to the absolute top of the pyramid. We want the crown. We want to be the CEO. We want our name in massive letters on the building. We want to be the person sitting on the throne, because we operate under the assumption that the throne is where the absolute freedom and power reside.
It's what we are all taught.
But after examining these historical figures, the Turners, the Isabeys, the people who survived, thrived, and ultimately pulled the levers of history by expertly manipulating the throne from the cool safety of the shadows, you have to wonder, what if the ultimate power isn't wearing the crown at all?
That's a great question.
What if the truest, most secure form of power is being the perfect courtier? The invisible, indispensable magician who quietly orchestrates the king's entire reality, reaps all the actual benefits, and directs the course of the empire, all without ever having to wear the massive, gleaming target on their own back.
It really makes you rethink everything.
Take a hard look around your own life tomorrow. Try to figure out who is really just walking on their hind legs, and who is actually quietly holding the leash. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.